to control your data. You need to be in control of the ability to interact with your customers. They're your customers. And so when you're reliant on third-party things that can change either through legislation or through, tech changes or whatever that may be, you're at a disadvantage.
Welcome to What Gets Measured, a NinjaCat podcast about marketing, performance management, metrics, and effectiveness. Because what gets measured gets managed. I'm your host, Jake Sanders. Zack Wenthe is the customer data platform evangelist for Treasure Data. He often speaks about the marketing and customer data industry at events, webinars, and virtual conferences. Having spent a majority of his career in marketing and marketing consulting, working with large enterprise brands like Walmart, Nationwide Insurance, FedEx, and many more, Zack now gets to tell the CDP story to help marketing teams eliminate the friction caused by silos, inefficiencies, and lack of understanding of their true customers. He's here to talk about unlocking the potential of customer data. Zack, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, yeah. Plenty of room. Make yourself comfortable. Give us a brief overview of the customer data landscape. How has the proliferation of data and tech helped or hindered marketers' ability to track results and create more effective campaigns?
Yeah, I think actually both sides of the coin, right? It's helped and hindered. As data has exploded, it's now not a question of should we collect this data? Can we collect this data? It's now, what the heck do we do with all this information that we're gathering? So,
Right.
In a lot of ways, we have more information, we have more understanding of our customers, we have more opportunity, at least, to understand our customers. The challenge has been still a lot of that data is locked away in point solutions or is in different variations of what I call data language, right? Where the email marketing system uses one set of metrics and kind of determines, engagement in one way. The social team may use a completely different language and different attributes. And then you sit in a marketing meeting and you all have to kind of translate to each other. Like what matters and what, and you're looking at fragments of an individual. And so that's still been the challenge for a lot of marketers is they have more information, but now tying it all together, creating that cohesive story and really being able to, attribute campaigns, not just digitally, but, what happens when somebody walks into a store? What happens when somebody visits your booth at an event, right?
Mm-hmm.
Taking those offline experiences as well and painting the full picture of your customer journey and all that it entails.
Mm. And so speak more about that different definitions. That's a big issue. An engagement isn't a sale or a conversion isn't all those things are. Do you have a way that you approach that? Do you kind of just make it all inclusive, or how do you approach the taxonomy issue?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing is one of the simplest things, but yet probably most elusive to a lot of organizations, is just starting a data dictionary, starting a collection of what are all of these different marketing systems tracking? What are you collecting? What are the attributes and values? And what is it that is customer defined? Preferences, consent, those kind of things that they're giving you the zero party data, if you will. Survey results, all of that information. What is system defined? Meaning, open rates, click rates, purchase rates, all of those things. And what are derived attributes? What are calculations, right? Customer lifetime value, it being an obvious one, total purchases, number of purchases. And having a kind of a view so that all the teams know who's collecting it, what system's collecting it, and therefore, especially with those derived calculations, what's the math behind it? Because if you have one team that's looking at engagement over the last 28 days, right? And they're using a metric of 28 days, and you have another one who's using a metric of 30, well, the math is going to be different. Or even at a grand level, one of the things that we see in the CDP and the customer data platform space is you have a lot of duplicates in your data. Often, if you haven't gone through the process of stitching all these people together, right? I have a loyalty platform profile. I have an email profile. I have 3 or 4 purchase profiles. And so if I'm doing things like revenue per customer, but I'm being counted 5 times, the denominator's wrong. You're creating a calculation based off of an inflated, number of customers that actually isn't reality. So it changes your strategy, it changes your tactics a lot if you're not looking at a unified view of metrics and whatnot. And then it becomes impossible to tell a narrative, right? How do you go and explain this to somebody who's not in the marketing space, right? The CFO, and say, well, okay, over here we're looking at the last 14 days, we're looking at 28 days. Like, it gets confusing. And people wonder why, when they're talking to marketing, they're like, I don't know what they're doing. I have no idea what they're working on.
It's just so
we're telling a different story,
and we're using all these acronyms that that might not work, but you're the insight of the window of visibility being time defined and how those things can just create duplications is really intense. Well, so let's move on. People have been talking about the cookie apocalypse. I don't know. Here I am, a marketer using some made-up word. But there has been a shift in marketing around data. You've spoken on other podcasts about marketers needing to shift their mindset toward owning data. Amidst privacy discussions, legislation, and multi-device behavior, why do you think data ownership is so important?
A lot of it comes down to control. If you go with the logic, right, if you aren't in control of this data, you're at the mercy of whatever platform, whatever publisher, whatever system you are reliant on. And that is a very tenuous position to be in, right? It's open for a lot of disruption, potentially, right? Unwanted disruption. And so, owning your data and having that control is 2 things. One, it allows you to have a better customer experience. Absolutely. Because I can now talk to you as a person and I can talk to you as an individual. I know more about you. You're not just an ID somewhere in some, ad tech software using, some derived, attributes about you, right? We can get to more understanding what is your preferences, what do you actually care about, what is meaningful to you, either through survey collection, through purchase behavior, through all those things. But more importantly, it protects you against all of a sudden something that was critical to your business being taken away. And, we saw that when Apple decided in iOS 14.5, when they're like, okay, we're going to, restrict and give people the option to not be tracked. And guess what? Everybody said, don't track me. I don't want to be tracked. And Facebook was relying on that data for a lot of their calculations and their attribution and their ad campaigns, and it hurt them, financially. There was a huge impact, right? And this is Facebook is a behemoth when it comes to data, and yet that was still a third-party data source that they didn't control, right? And so when you ladder that down to the average marketer who's not Facebook, right? Just having, the old trope was always, right, get your own email list because at least you can always email somebody. Well, just take that and multiply that out about all of the systems, right? Getting an email list, getting purchase information, tying it together. It's just the same example, but just with all of your systems and all of your technology.
And so what do you, just kind of offhand, what do you think this cookie apocalypse is headed towards? It's weird because for a long time in the industry, it was like, people don't really care. They'll just give an email and, they really don't care what you do with the data. But I think people are becoming more conscious because of that Apple move. What do you think is like the trend? Are we headed towards just gone? Third-party data is just gone. You think that's where we're going?
I think in general, we're going to go to much more third-party data tied to an individual is going to be relatively gone. I think you'll have the idea of, aggregate information, right? So I'll still be able to maybe understand, at an aggregate level what my audience is doing or who my audience might be from third-party sources. But I think as consumers, we figured out our data is worth something, right? And it's valuable and it's easily misused. So I think when you take both of those things of, everybody's watched the, kind of what happened with, Cambridge Analytica data, and then it kind of became other things. And, finally, yeah, the tech provider said, hey, look, we're not going to wait for legislation. We're going to do what's right for our customers. Whether that's a positioning statement from Apple or whether that's, good natured, who knows? But in the end, I think as a consumer, we've said, okay, look, we're willing to give out our information. Surveys still today say when asked, consumers will say, absolutely, I'll give up information for personalization from a brand I trust, from somebody I know how they're going to use it, right? So
Right.
if I buy something online, I'm willing to give out my home address because you have to ship it to me. I know that that's part of the exchange. That doesn't mean I want to give you my salary range and how many people live in my household and whatever profiling data that company may want.
Mm-hmm.
They don't necessarily need it for that exchange. And so consumers have kind of woken up to that idea.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, the opportunity is you can still get that information that you may have purchased from a third party or you may have used, ad tech software. I think there will still be options, right? The ad tech industry is going to figure out alternatives.
Mm-hmm.
It'll just be less, one-to-one and less controlled. And therefore you're going to have to make decisions based on, kind of greater good messages. What's good for the whole as opposed to, what matters to Zack specifically.
Yeah. And speaking just kind of freely about that, like even if you had all the granularity of the customer information, could track all the hundreds of points of engagement, you'd still be left in a deluge of data that you'd have to kind of form a narrative with. And it's like, in a way, it sort of helps make our jobs a little easier, would you think? Or as more data as you can get, the better,
I think in honesty, there's a happy medium, right?
Mhm.
I think there is core behavioral data that, from a first party perspective, that is absolutely valuable.
Right.
Preferences, attributes, affinities, those kind of things.
Right.
What channels do you prefer, right? Because just because I follow you on social and get your emails and your text message doesn't mean I want messages on all of those channels from a brand, right? So knowing channel preferences or predicting channel preferences, those are all super valuable.
Mhm.
But at the same time, just because there's a data point out there, does it need to be collected? Not necessarily, because at first we were kind of like, oh man, we'll take whatever we can get. We don't know what we're going to do with it yet, but we'll take it and figure it out later.
Right.
And that's added to a lot of that challenge, right? That's added to a lot of the, well, how do I tie this back to something? Plus, it just adds to the friction in all the exchanges. In the B2B world, this has always been the, how many fields do you put on a form problem, right? So it's like, if there's more than 4 or 5 fields, it adds friction. There's less form fills. Oh, but we have to have that information to route it to, a sales team, because if we don't have that information, no one will ever know how to follow up. Well, okay, that may be your business process, but is that the reality, right? Can that business rule be rewritten so that it's more customer friendly? Because then that leads to trust, it leads to understanding, it leads to engagement earlier in a sales cycle as opposed to people avoiding forms. It's having those conversations about the give and take of like, do we need this data? And what are we going to do with it once we have it?
Yeah, totally. It's like, I could know your salary range, the size of your company, your astrological sign, but it's like, if I know that more Capricorns than Tauruses, it's like, you've just confused and maybe you've lost the plot, but good for you for getting that data. Anyway, I'm a Taurus, if you need to know. Let's move on to speaking about dashboards. How do you report this stuff? You're going through the ways of defining it, collecting it, kind of parsing it out, taking the duplication efforts out, but then you got to put it in a dashboard or, report it.
Yep.
Analytics and metrics wise, how should agencies and clients approach dashboards and reports? Like, how can marketers help wrangle data that help into reports that help them strategize rather than be mesmerized with huge data sets and 100-page decks?
Yes. Yeah. So I think that's one of the very, core functionalities or benefits to a CDP, to a customer data platform, because first thing it's going to do is it's going to take all of those fragments of customers, right? That loyalty profile, the email profile, all of these disparate kind of pieces, and we're going to link them together through what we call identity resolution, which is a fancy word for stitching all these profiles together into a single 360-degree view of the customer, which has always been, for the longest time, the kind of the desire of marketers, right? We want that 360-degree view. And so that's what identity resolution does. It's either we'll start with exact matching, which is, name to name, email to email. We're going to link all of those up. And then we're going to go into probabilistic or fuzzy matching, which is using variations of data to, collect, right? So misspellings of names can be avoided, or different addresses, but all of the other information matches. Well, maybe the person moved. Maybe a person got married, so they changed their last name, but all the other data stays the same. So being able to resolve all of that information into a single, parent record or persistent, record.
Right.
Therefore, now as new data is coming, I can add it to that record. I can get smarter. Maybe there's some records I can't link together right now. I don't have enough data, but in time, they add their email to this, they add their phone to that. I can match it back to that cookie ID or whatever from that device. It all gets linked together. And so now when I'm looking at my dashboards, I'm looking at a resolved profile. So now I don't have to go through the data preps side and say, okay, well, this is an email dashboard. This is a social dashboard. I can say, well, what's my engagement dashboard, right? And look at some variation of that. What does my journey look like across all of those channels? Because I'm working with a single, identifier, if you will, or single person, if you will, to be able to kind of ladder that up. And then you can start to look for trends and start to look for information and start to not have dashboards built by silos or teams, which mirror the silos of the data, but actually have a more holistic view of your, of your data. And then I think what's even more valuable then is saying, hey, I have a dashboard. I can look, but now I can also do some ad hoc analysis. I can start to ask questions of my data without being a data engineer, without being a data scientist. I can go and say, okay, well, let me build an audience of people who have purchased over a certain spend level, but haven't bought in the last year. What do they look like? Who are they? What might be unique about them that these are lapsed customers? And you might look at that in a dashboard view. You might use machine learning to do some of that. But now you're starting to kind of attack a hypothesis without having to kind of go through the cycle every time of like, well, let's build another dashboard. And then that dashboard sits out there and nobody uses it, right? So it's more in time with the data.
Well, and it's just brilliant that I think a lot of us are channel specified when we're reporting, like how's Twitter doing? How's Pinterest doing? What's Amazon up to? What you're saying is take all those actions and put them in a dashboard that connects with behavior. Like, did I just have my mind blown? Do you blow people's minds often with that, Zach? I mean, I'm just like, hello, why aren't we doing this? That's how you get to the heart of analysis and insight and strategy. I don't know. Maybe that's more of a statement.
Well, no, I mean, but it's a very valid statement, right? Because a lot of times what happens when we're doing those channels or those silos is we're creating a proxy for success, right? So we're saying, okay, well, if they clicked through from Twitter onto our landing page, that's success. And so then you're measuring all that. But then the CFO or somebody's going to go, yeah, but what revenue did that generate? Well, we don't know because we can't track that. All we're tracking here is this. And then somebody else is going to go, yeah, but our landing page converted at X, X, Y, and Z. Well, okay, how much of that traffic was Twitter? Well, we don't track that. So you get to kind of that story of, or you start to create these, whether you use UTM variables or, we start to create the more data points to try and tie all that together. And simply we can say, hey, we know this here's their email profile. They click through on that email and here's what they've spent in the last year. By stitching all that together into that single source of truth and created in the customer data platform, now we can look at the holistic view of an individual, a segment, an audience, a geographic region, whatever that is, and know that we're telling the right story, not just the channel story.
Quote bomb.
So let's go into story time. Let's pull up a seat, we'll light the fire. Can you share a Cinderella story where a business or brand approached customer data and unlocked some groundbreaking stuff? And conversely, do you have any horror stories about data gone wrong?
Sure. Yeah. So Cinderella story. So one of our customers is they're D2C, direct to consumer. There's another one of those acronyms. They're direct to consumer, prepackaged, like pre-prepped meal service, right? So healthy meals. And one of the the statements that they had kind of said is like, look, as a marketer, we should never argue over who our personas are. Yep, we do, right? We argue over all the time because we didn't really know. And so when you looked at their website, when you looked at their marketing materials, when you ask the team, like, who's our ideal customer profile? Who is our target market, right? Inevitably, they were leaning towards athletes, marathon runners, whatever, right? So the CrossFitters, the people who are like, okay, I need healthy meals fast, and I want, and that was their target demographic, and that was who they were, creating all their strategy for, their imagery, all their ad imagery. And yet when they were going through a investor round, they were raising money, and the investor said, how do you know that that's the case? And they said, we don't really know. Well, at the same time, they were putting in their CDP, and they went out and took a bunch of psychographic and demographic data along with transactional data and some multi-touch attribution. So they put it all together into these profiles, and they started looking at who's our most engaged, who buys the most often, what do they look like? Well, they found out that their actual customer, their ideal customer, was an aging parent, somebody who either had kids in high school or just recent empty nesters. They were busy. They wanted to eat healthy, but they weren't cooking for, a huge family, or they were, getting something on the go or whatever. They were spending the most money and were absolutely the most engaged profile. Not at all the marathoner, not at all the long distance runner, the cycler, the CrossFitter. Completely different. So being able to say, not only are these people spending the most money, they're engaged with our brand, they're clicking on our content, they're reading our blog posts. This is a big content company, right? They do hundreds of posts.
Yeah.
And these are the posts that mattered to them when they were buying, right? They read these. We could attribute our content strategy back to, who looked at what. But there's not enough content for that type of demographic, right? There wasn't enough. They didn't have a whole lot. They had a lot of stuff on what to eat before the big race and things along that, right? So being able to shift their strategy, their imagery, being able to drive all that based on actually knowing their customers and backing up with data, right? It wasn't just this gut feeling of marketers sitting in a room. We've all done it. I've done it. Of like, this is who it's going to be. The data was a completely different reality.
Ooh. And so before we get into a horror story, because I'd love to hear that, switching content like that, did they get dinged in a search engine result? I mean, like, because if they've been spending years focusing in on this, did they get dinged when they started releasing more blogs that were more towards this healthy, quick meal for the parent on the go?
No, because I think a lot of what they did is they just, it was not, major shifts in the content. It was more in kind of the positioning of the story, right? So these people were still interested in keto or paleo or, healthy eating. It was so the foundational pieces were still the same. It was just creating that more emotional affinity, right? So changing your imagery out so that you're not looking at somebody who, is in the gym, but as to somebody who's, in a minivan, or whatever. Right. And so, but just shifting, minor shifts, because they still had a core segment of the audience that was that athletic group. But no, I don't. And they didn't do it all. It wasn't like, let's get rid of every article,
Right.
They were very smart about it, and they kind of made shifts over time and improved and grew into it. But they also knew, like, hey, this is the content that's working. Like, let's add these into our nurture platforms. Let's add these into our follow-up sequences. Let's add these into all these different steps, because these were content pieces. So it wasn't even just organic. It was part of their now engagement strategy. Like, let's make sure that these get in front of the audience, because when they do, they convert.
Can I just say that this Cinderella story is sort of a horror story in the fact that they just went hard on customer segmentation and personas without knowing anything? How often do you see that happen? Like, I think it's frighteningly common, right? Okay, good.
Yeah, all the time. I've kind of coined the idea of like most personas are like created like by using a Ouija board, right? Like, I'm just gonna we're all gonna get in a room and we're gonna pray to the marketing gods and hope that they're gonna come up with a persona of a whatever, and then we're gonna make up a name for her and we're gonna tell her your backstory, and none of it matters. None of it actually works, because I can't write a story to that. I can't tell a narrative to that. Because
you can make it up out of whole cloth. You can make it up,
right? But it doesn't resonate. It doesn't land. It doesn't, it doesn't actually drive lift on the website. And so being able to actually back all of this up with data is huge. Huge, it's absolutely important.
Huge. But doing it on the other side of it before you even go, like, it's like, Bell, hello. I mean, but also, I love the fact that it wasn't a shift in branding. It's a shift in positioning. I think there's also another thing like, our whole brand is wrong. It was like, no, just the way you're kind of talking. And it's a really subtle shift. But I love that data can unlock a positioning strategy that just, can help you double down on the things that are working. I mean, mind blown again. Do you have a spooky story?
Well, so I'll put a couple customers together into one, so I don't like spill everybody's tea a little bit. Okay. But I say generally the horror comes from the technology is great, the data is important, putting it all together. But if your org is not ready for change, or you are resistant to change, like magically adding technology or magically adding new dashboards will do nothing, right? And so I've seen it go where the IT is like, hey, I'm tired of building reports for marketing. I'm tired of doing this. So they go out and they try to put in tech, and they want to solve it from a tech problem, which is great for a tech company, right? Like, we love that. The problem is we also want our customers to use it. And so when they don't engage marketing, or marketing's not involved in the conversation and saying, hey, this is really how we're going to use it, or like why we'd want to use it, or we're totally bought into this idea of breaking down silos, if they're not there, then this is going to fail. You're going to spend a lot of money, put a lot of effort in for fundamentally will become another silo, because the marketing team is going to be like, well, we're going to still use our systems. And so we've seen it a lot. Like, Gartner even says, on average right now, 2.3 CDPs per enterprise organization are kind of deployed. I don't know where the 0.3 comes from, but, I think on average, right, that the idea is that they went about it as a tech problem, but really, yeah, tech solves a solution and a pain, but there's an organizational change and there's a mindset shift that has to happen first. So without going into any one specific, I think the thing is where they go very, very, very wrong is when the org isn't aligned and the strategy isn't there, and you don't agree. And so you just think spending money on technology is going to solve the problem. It never does. It never does, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. So many product people are rolling over. They're like, oh, come on. But just give me one more iteration. Give me one more development meeting. Like, we can make it happen. And it's a soft thing that needs to be touched by the hardness of technology. And I mean, what's that hesitancy there? I mean, do you think it starts at the C-suite, or is it a leadership problem, or is it sort of, that organizational mindset? How do you get people shifted towards that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is definitely I don't know if it's a leadership problem, but it's a leadership mentality, right? A lot of that comes from, well, this is how we measure, often therefore how we're compensated, or how our teams are. Our bonus structures are. And so all of a sudden, if you're saying, hey, get rid of some of those metrics that really don't matter, right? We've created these proxy metrics or some of this data, and now we're going to put it over here, or you're not going to be in control of this data anymore. People get scared. They don't, especially if it's somewhat working, right? People are resistant to change. But again, a lot of that then goes to saying, well, look, the intent is to improve customer experience, to improve profitability with the organization. So if we have to change comp structures, or if we have to change, strategy, like internal kind of how we, measure success, so be it, because the end result is the same, right? And so I think it's the messy middle that really messes things up, right? The company's, the CEO's vision isn't necessarily changing because you're putting the technology in, and even the department tactics may not be changing. It's what happens in between that tactic and the strategy, and how we're defining it, reporting on it, planning on it, investing in it, that gets kind of tough sometimes.
Yeah. And the data is sort of the thing that the data don't lie. That's sort of like, if you can collect it and you can just present it in a way that makes this like functional mindset shift the only viable path, you just let the data do the storytelling. Is that sort of what I'm hearing?
Yes, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. You can say, hey, we believe this for only so long. When the data's going in a different direction, you have to say, okay, like, let's at least test it, right? I'm a big fan of test, iterate, create a hypothesis, and go out there and let the data lead you. It may lead you a path that you're not happy with, and you then can decide, hey, is this the right path we're going down or not? Right? Do we like that path as a company or not? But at least then you're doing it with intent. And with iteration and testing, as opposed to, kind of throwing on your blinders and saying, hey, this is it because my gut tells me it is, and one of the biggest things I think, and one of the biggest trends in marketing right now, is the gut we had is gone, because the last 2 or 3 years has really fundamentally shifted everything. Right. So people who were never buying online are now buying online. People who have groceries delivered to their, to their homes that were shopping it, So the whole way the pandemic forced it, but then now people got used to it. Right. And they've changed. Digital's caught up in a lot of areas. A lot of digital transformation that was supposed to take years took months. And all of a sudden, things that we thought consumers would do, they don't do anymore. Or they do differently. And so you can't say, well, this is how we have always done it, or my gut tells me that this is what they'll do, because in reality, that's potentially very different, right? That's a very different, outcome these days than what we would have been able to predict it, as a marketer, predict and guess and get right 2 or 3 years ago.
Wow. Once again, you're just a gale force wind is what Zack is providing here for everybody. So just listen to what he's saying. But you've said so much about, defining things, shifting mindsets, how you can track user engagement, and how you can just kind of make personas up out of nowhere and gather the data to question those assumptions and iterate and create insights and then deliver those things. And so you said so much, but here I want you to condense it all down, shrink it all down, cook it, simmer it, and make a fine compote of information. If you could give one piece of advice to the audience now about customer data, what would it be?
If I could give one piece of advice, and I think I said it at the beginning, but it's you need to control your data. You need to be in control of the ability to interact with your customers. They're your customers. And so when you're reliant on third-party things that can change either through legislation or through, tech changes or whatever that may be, you're at a disadvantage. And so you've got some time. It's not like there's not impending doom. In some areas, there may be more impending doom than others. But any step you can take towards controlling your data, bringing it in a house, having access to it, opens you up from 2 very big perspectives. One is now you still have a channel available to you if things change. You still have control, right? CPG is a great example. They don't necessarily own the relationship with the purchase of the customer, but they figured out during the pandemic, so many of them were like, well, the tactics we used don't work anymore, right? This wasn't a data problem, but they couldn't use shelf talkers, end caps at a grocery store as a way to attract, customers or drive buying decisions. wasn't there. People weren't walking in the stores.
Mm-hmm.
So being able to build that relationship and at least, influence the time to buy was a big shift in the CPG space, and we see it ongoing. So control your data, bring it all in house. It also protects your brand, because when you have it in house, you can layer in governance, you can have control, you can work with trusted agencies and partners and determine like who has access to what PII. You can get things out of Excel spreadsheets, or buying lists that may or may not be legal anymore, depending on the legislation. So it just allows you to be more protective of the data that you're letting into your org, and how you're using it as well. So control your data.
Control your data. Boy, this is fantastic information. Everybody is taking notes. I can hear them scribbling in the back, pencils down. But also, let's find out where people can learn more about you and connect with you online, Zack.
Yeah. So I am on LinkedIn. I spend a lot of time on there. Happy to talk to anybody who's a listener. Just it's Zack Wenthe, Wenthe. Search me. There's not many of us out there, so I don't think you'll have a hard time finding me. But ask questions, send me a message. I'm happy to talk. Obviously, I work for a company called Treasure Data, treasuredata.com. You can hop online, request a demo if you want to. But more importantly, just happy to continue the conversation if anybody has questions about this. Obviously, I never met a shortage of things to talk about, so I'm always happy to connect with marketers and chat about this.
Cheese or chocolate?
Are you ready?
Okay.
Cheese or chocolate?
Chocolate.
Camping or glamping?
Glamping.
Okay. First row at a concert or streaming from the couch?
I'm definitely a streaming from the couch person.
No problem. You know your customer data profile. Hot tub time machine or Nirvana sauna?
Oh, Great White Buffalo, hot tub time machine.
Club sandwich or sandwiched in a crowded club?
These days it would be definitely club sandwich. Although in my younger years, maybe crowded in a club.
Yep. Jimmy Page or Jimi Hendrix?
Ooh, Jimi Hendrix.
Totes. And finally, tea time with Elon Musk or TEA time with Bill Gates?
That's a tough one. I think these days Elon Musk. I think I'm gonna just because I think it'd be a wild experience, no matter what you get out of it.
What Gets Measured is a NinjaCat podcast. Please rate and review the show wherever you find your podcasts. Share this episode on social, and visit us on the web at ninjacat.io.